The case was closed. All the evidence had been collected, all the witnesses interviewed, and the final verdict rendered. Yet, long after the gavel fell and the courtroom emptied, a phone call arrived, one that would throw everything into question. It wasn't just any call. It was the kind of call that makes you sit up straight, the kind that sends chills down your spine, because it challenges everything you thought you knew. This is the story of the call that arrived after the case was decided. A true story where justice seemed final, only for an unexpected voice to reopen a mystery that everyone believed was settled. It began with what appeared to be a straightforward investigation. A victim, a suspect, and a clear chain of evidence leading to a conclusion. Detectives had worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle, examining alibis, fingerprints, and phone records. By all accounts, the case was airtight. Friends and family of the victim felt relief. The suspect's family accepted the outcome, and the community assumed the story had reached its natural end. But no investigation, no matter how thorough, can account for every variable, especially the ones that surface after the final decision. The phone rang late one night, a direct line to the lead detective who had overseen the investigation. The voice on the other end was calm, almost unnervingly so. The caller claimed to have information that no one had considered, evidence that could change the trajectory of the entire case. Yet, they refused to identify themselves fully, leaving just enough detail to demand attention, but not enough to verify their credibility. It was a riddle in human form, an invisible thread tugging at the edges of a seemingly finished tapestry. The detective who took the call knew immediately that ignoring it would be a mistake. Despite the case being officially closed, the sense of unease was overwhelming. There was a subtle but unmistakable hint that something critical had been overlooked. Something that, if understood, could alter perceptions, challenge the conclusions, and possibly even implicate entirely new people in the events that had already been ruled on. Every investigator knows the feeling, that prickling awareness that a case, no matter how neatly it's tied up on paper, may still be incomplete. Details began to resurface, small inconsistencies that had been buried in the original report. A witness statement that seemed off, a security camera angle that was never fully examined, a voicemail that had been dismissed as irrelevant. Each piece, when revisited in the context of the mysterious phone call, began to take on a weight it had never had before. The puzzle, once thought solved, now felt like a distorted reflection of itself. The edges no longer aligned. Shadows lurked where light had once been cast. Friends of the victim were puzzled by the call, anxious yet compelled to believe it mattered. The sense of finality that had settled over the case was shattered, replaced by tension and uncertainty. The detective attempted to trace the number, to uncover the caller's identity, but every method seemed to lead to a dead end. It was as if the person on the line existed solely to unsettle, to challenge the narrative, and to remind everyone involved that truth is often more elusive than it appears. The strange nature of the call itself added to the mystery. There was no accusation, no direct demand, no confession. Instead, it was a series of subtle hints and observations, details that only someone with intimate knowledge of the case could know. Yet, the source refused to clarify motives or intentions. The detective was left with fragments, each one potentially significant, but impossible to act upon without context. The unanswered questions multiplied rapidly, creating a new layer of complexity over what had been a neatly resolved investigation. As the hours turned into days, the detective and a select few colleagues revisited the files with fresh eyes. Every minor discrepancy, every overlooked report, every ignored lead was scrutinized anew. And while some of the original conclusions remained plausible, others began to unravel under the weight of the new perspective offered by the mysterious caller. It was an exercise in meticulous examination, the kind that consumes sleep, patience, and certainty. And yet, even with the careful analysis, the answers remained just out of reach, tantalizingly close yet frustratingly elusive. As the investigation reopened in secret, patterns began to emerge that no one had noticed before. Minor details, once dismissed as irrelevant, now carried disproportionate significance. A car seen near the victim's house at an unusual hour, a brief conversation recorded in a voicemail that had been overlooked, and a ledger entry that didn't match the financial timeline, all of it suggested that the initial case file was incomplete. It wasn't that the investigators had made careless mistakes. It was as if someone, somewhere, had intentionally left gaps that would only become visible after the fact. The detective realized that the mysterious call wasn't just a random interruption, it was a warning, a challenge, a clue delivered in fragments. Whoever had made the call understood the case better than most of the people involved. Yet their motives remained a puzzle. Were they trying to help, to expose a truth, or to manipulate the situation for their own ends? The ambiguity was unnerving, and the detective understood that acting on partial information could be just as dangerous as ignoring it. Over the following weeks, the team cross-referenced every lead, every statement, every overlooked document. They reconstructed timelines, retraced movements, and compared them against the original reports. Slowly, a picture began to form, a picture that contradicted the narrative everyone had accepted. It suggested that the disappearance and subsequent investigation had been far more complex than anyone realized. There were no easy answers, no neat resolutions. The case that had seemed solved was revealed to be a layered mystery, each layer raising more questions than it answered. Family members of the victim were drawn into this renewed scrutiny. Their initial relief turned to anxiety as the detective shared fragments of what had been uncovered. Every revelation added weight to the fear that justice, as it had been delivered, might have been incomplete. Friends and witnesses were re-interviewed, and some began to recall details they had previously dismissed. Memory, it seemed, was shaped as much by omission as by fact, and what was left unspoken in the original investigation became the key to understanding the truth. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the call was that it never directly solved the case. It didn't reveal a murderer or a missing person's location. Instead, it exposed a flaw in the system, the idea that no matter how thorough an investigation might appear, there is always room for oversight, error, or deliberate concealment. The call served as a reminder that truth is rarely absolute, that the final word on any case is often provisional, and that sometimes the most important developments come after the official conclusion has been declared. In the end, the call that arrived after the case was decided is a story not just about crime or investigation, but about uncertainty, about the fragility of assumed truths, and about how one voice, arriving at just the right moment, can challenge the very foundation of a resolution. It reminds us that, even in cases that appear closed, mysteries linger, questions remain unasked, and the answers may only emerge when someone finally dares to speak. The case may have been decided, but the story is far from over, leaving investigators, families, and observers alike with a chilling awareness. Sometimes the conclusion isn't the end, and the truth waits for those willing to seek it beyond what is officially written.